Welcome, and today's lesson is going to be chapter 7, and the topic is murder. And in the book, The Path of the Righteous Gentile, at least in my edition, it's page 80. The previous chapter, the longest, previous chapter was blasphemy, and the one before that was the longest one, all about idolatry. Okay, now, murder is one of the 7 universal Noahide commandments. A couple of things by way of introduction before we actually see the text inside. One thing, I want to take this opportunity to mention something which I've mentioned before, and that is many people mistakenly think of the 10 commandments as the universal laws. That's not accurate. There are 7 universal laws that are given for the Noachites, and all of their subdivisions and the offshoots of those 7. But the 10 are not. Now, of course, many of the 10 are the 7. That's fine. They overlap. But to say that the 10 commandments are what the world needs and keeps, etc., that's simply inaccurate. For example, one of the 10 commandments is to observe and to keep the Sabbath, Shabbos, and that is actually forbidden for a non-Jew to do. So there you have it. But one of the 10 commandments is murder. And that, of course, is one of the 7 as well. So in that case, it works. Now, as we've said in previous classes, much of what the laws are for the Jewish people when it comes to these 7 apply equally to the non-Jew, to the Noahide. However, there are differences. Sometimes it doesn't apply. Sometimes we're stricter with the Jew, and oftentimes we're stricter with the Noahide. So that's important to note. Now, in this chapter, as in most of the book, much of it is a direct translation from the Rambam for Maimonides. And again, those parts which are relevant to the non-Jew as well, even though the Rambam, Maimonides, is definitely primarily speaking to the Jew. I mean, it's quoting from his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah, and that was written for the Jewish people, including the 7 Noahide commandments that are there. He's talking to the Jew so that he can instruct and teach and guide the non-Jew. But if there's laws of, let's say, in this case, murder, so if that's also prohibition for the non-Jew, well, then we could learn it from the Rambam. Some of the information that we're going to be learning in this chapter is practically not relevant yet. It will become relevant as soon as we have Mashiach completely revealed, and we will be in the land of Israel, the Jewish people, that is, and then we'll get to the details of why that's not relevant and why it will become, or at least theoretically, will become relevant. So again, just remember that, and we can begin now inside. So again, chapter 7, murder. One more point. As is the case when it comes to any mitzvah, any commandment of the 613 for the Jews, and for that matter, the 7, none of them can be properly and clearly and completely understood from the text of the Bible, from the written law, known as the written Torah. We have to have the oral tradition, Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral teachings, which is the explanation to what it says in the written. And again, not to be confused with rabbinic law. That's something else. The rabbis have the authority to make all sorts of rules and regulations, even though biblically something might be permitted, rabbinically it can be forbidden. That's not what I'm talking about in this case. I'm simply saying biblically, we wouldn't understand what the Bible is saying without the oral tradition that goes back all the way to Moses receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai and directly being taught and told orally by God what the meaning of the written word is. And then he transmitted that orally, and this was the oral tradition until it was finally recorded and written down. But otherwise, it's part of the oral tradition. So in this case, too, it seems quite clear. We have a verse in the book of Genesis, in the Torah portion of Noach, and yet what that means and how it applies, we of course need to have the oral tradition. So let me just, before we even see it inside, it's actually 2 verses or a verse and a half. And where it's about to be quoted into the English, but I want to read the original for you. This is in the book of Genesis, Bereshis, chapter 9, and the middle of verse 5, and then verse 6. And then I'm going to throw in verse 7, which we may not get to explain why I'm throwing that in today, but we'll see. I just want you to pay close attention how right after verse 6, what it says in the next verse in 7. All right. Middle of verse 5. So I'm talking Genesis 9:5. Umiyad ha'adam, miyad ish achid edrishes nefesh adam. From the hand of man, even from the hand of man's own brother, will I demand an account of man's soul. And now comes the next verse, which this is really the source of the prohibition of murder for the Noachite. One might say, well, wait, doesn't it say it more explicitly in the 10 Commandments? It does. And as I said, 10 Commandments are for the Jew. 10 Commandments, it has 2 words. It says, Loi tirtzach, thou shall not murder. That's simple. But that's talking to the Jew. What does it say here in the parsha of Noach, for all of mankind? Again, Genesis 9:6. Shoifech dam ha'adam. Whoever sheds the blood of man, ba'adam damo yishafech. By man shall his blood be shed. Ki b'tzelem elikim asas ha'adam. For he made man in the image of God. That is the verse itself. And then the next verse, verse 7, and now you be fruitful and multiply, spread throughout the earth and multiply on it. Okay, now let's begin inside. 1, the commandment prohibiting murder is explicitly stated to Noah, by God. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for he made man in the image of God. Genesis 9:6. 2, a Noachide who kills a human being, even a baby, in the womb of its mother. I guess that would be called fetus in the medical term or scientific term, receives the death penalty. So that is a capital offense. This means the one who strikes a pregnant woman, thereby killing the fetus, incurs the death penalty. And now, very important, parenthetically, the act must have been done at least 40 days after conception. Before 40 days, the act is in the category of destruction of man's seed, which is going to be discussed later, and the transgressor is liable for punishment from heaven, not by a court on earth. Okay, so I don't want to speak about it yet. We're going to get to it. And it's a very, very severe, very serious sin. However, the punishment is only by the heavenly court. It is not by court down here. So therefore, if someone terminates a pregnancy within the first 40 days of conception, that would be basically tantamount to spilling seed. However, after 40 days, then the fetus is already considered in a different category. And although it's obviously nowhere near fully developed, it is considered murder. And that would be a death penalty for a Noachide. Yeah, we're talking only about Noachide. So now I have to turn to the Jews that may be watching or listening and remind the Jewish people this is not necessarily how it applies to Jews. And again, either direction, we could be stricter or more lenient, but this is the law for the non-Jewish world for the Noachites. 3, men and women have an equal responsibility to observe the prohibition against murder. And any act for which a man is held liable, a woman is equally held liable. No difference. Now, you may ask, well, isn't that obvious? I'm not going to get into it now. The Talmud discusses it and explains why I may have thought otherwise. But yes, this is a prohibition. It's a negative commandment. It's one of the don'ts. And men and women are equal. There's no difference. 4, if a person kills one who is terminally ill or is falling from the top of a cliff or is certain to die momentarily for any other reason, he transgresses the prohibition against murder and is liable for punishment by the courts. This judgment places the idea of mercy killing or euthanasia squarely in the category of murder. Now, very short little paragraph, but there's volumes to speak about this. Not very simple, somewhat controversial. However, the way they put it in this paragraph is actually true. It's right. And when it comes to, right now we're learning this, this particular paragraph, I would say we're learning it theoretically. So theoretically, this is the law. However, when it comes to an actual case, one must ask an authoritative person, which would be not just anybody who's called a rabbi, not just someone who's an ordained rabbi, but because this is the most serious cases, we're talking over here about murder, so a person must ask a question of a person who is trained in this field and is an authority to give a ruling. And every case has to be dealt with on its own merits, so to say. And we have no right to compare one case to another and say, well, I know in this case, this is what he said, so why doesn't it apply here? Sometimes what seems to us as a little difference might really make a world of a difference. So if someone is on life support in one way or another, whatever the case may be, it's not simple. And I'll be quite frank with you, amongst today's authorities and today's people that have the right to give a legal ruling within the Jewish world, there are different opinions. It is, there's a dispute, it's controversial. So just in general, this is true. What it says here is accurate and is correct. And sometimes it's very, very difficult. And sometimes it goes against, it's almost counterintuitive, because as a moral, kind, merciful human being, we can't at times bear to see someone suffer, let alone if it's an immediate relative. And therefore, using our own logic, one would want to put them out of their misery. And oftentimes, that is not God's will, that is not God's command. And it gets very philosophical. And just to kind of give you an idea or a thought, we don't always necessarily know how to measure the purpose of life. It's that simple. We don't know why God would want a person who seems to be not productive to suffer like that, or to be in that state where sometimes it seems like they may not even be suffering anymore, or who knows? It's not even a medical issue, it's a philosophical issue. We don't know, we don't understand. And therefore, it's very important that we follow the rules, even when it goes against our perception of morality and goodness and kindness. Because the one who, at the end of the day, is the one who defines right from wrong and good from bad is God himself. So we have to follow his rulings, as difficult as that may be. Now, again, there's much, much more to say, but we're going to continue for now. Number 5, if one pushes a person onto railway tracks and a train subsequently comes and kills him, or if one leaves a person in a situation where he will surely starve to death, although the action only indirectly causes the person's death, it is murder and the act is punishable by the courts. Okay, so in other words, even if you did it indirectly, the person locked someone in a place, they put them in a pit and they put the lid on, and there's no way the person can get out, and they starve to death. So even though the person could say, I didn't use any weapon, I didn't directly pierce their body or anything like that, yet it is punishable by the courts, meaning that a Noachite would be put to death for murder. 6, top of page 81. If a person sees someone pursuing another for the obvious or suspected intent of committing murder, or with the intent of causing the pursued to commit a sin, and the observer is able to stop the pursuer by wounding him, but kills him instead, he transgresses this commandment and receives the death penalty. If, however, the person himself is being pursued, he is free to take any action necessary to save his own life. So basically like this, you see someone chasing someone else with a knife, and the intention is to kill the person. And you can clearly stop them by shooting them in the legs. And instead, the person aimed for the heart. That is forbidden. That is called murder, because you could have accomplished what you need to accomplish, in other words, to get the pursuer to stop, by simply wounding them. So the fact that the person killed them when there was another option, that's murder. If there is no other option, then yes, you're obligated to kill the pursuer. But again, if the person himself, in self-defense, is saving of themselves, they do not need to make that calculation and say, well, let me try to shoot them in the leg, because then they won't be able to get me. No, if you're the one that's being chased, your life is in danger, you may aim for the heart. 7, authorities disagree as to whether it is permissible for a Noachite to kill a fetus in order to save the life of the mother. You know, at times, the mother's life is in danger by the pregnancy or by the birth process. But all agree that taking the mother's life to save the fetus is murder and punishable by the courts. Again, this is very, very complicated and detailed, and volumes can be discussed about this. But let's put it this way. Even though the unborn fetus is considered a person, and it's forbidden to kill that fetus, and it is considered murder. However, there is a difference between the mother and the unborn fetus. The mother takes precedence in the sense that she is already a living person. And as long as the fetus did not yet emerge from the womb of the mother, the fetus is secondary. Once the fetus is coming out, then they're equal. All right? So therefore, it's definitely forbidden to kill the mother in order to save the baby. However, the other way around, as he said, there's a disagreement involved. 8. If a Noachite kills someone through a messenger, a hitman, you hired somebody, or they're ready to do it as a favor, whatever the case is, both the messenger and the one who sent him are liable for punishment as murderers. And again, I don't want to have to keep repeating myself. This is strictly the way the rules are for the Noachites, not necessarily are the same rules applicable to the Jews. So again, if one hires someone to kill someone, both the person who hired them and the messenger have committed murder. And it doesn't make a difference whether you paid the person or whether you just asked them to do you a favor. 9. A person is commanded to allow himself to be killed rather than killed. This means that if people try to compel a person on pain of death to kill someone, he must not commit murder regardless of the consequences. So a person has to allow themselves to be killed and not kill someone else. And again, this too has many, many details, which basically would end up being exceptions to this rule. But this is definitely the rule. 10. Suicide is forbidden under the 7 universal laws. And it may sound like a joke, but I'm not joking. It really says that the penalty for suicide is a capital offense, is death. But in other words, the severity, it is death. Just because it's one's own life, they have absolutely no right to take their own life, no matter how bad the situation is. And again, this too will lend itself to for example, one of many what ifs. Person is about to be caught and tortured to death, or tortured and they'll make sure the person doesn't die. Can the person commit suicide instead of being tortured, unbearable torture by the enemy? Just, like certain, whatever, soldiers or spies or whatever have with them, the pill that could end their life basically immediately. And they need to have that with them in case they're caught. And we know the story with King Saul, how his life ended. So there's a lot to be discussed about that. But otherwise, as a rule, yes, suicide is murder and it is absolutely forbidden. Next. 11. There is no place of legal refuge for a murderer. Any relative on the father's side of a murder victim who can legally inherit property of the deceased. That's how you determine whether they're a relative. You say, oh, it's my third cousin. Well, if you can legally inherit property of the deceased, that person may disengage himself a blood avenger and then go after the murderer. If the murder was committed intentionally with malice, aforethought, it is the blood avenger's obligation to see that the murderer is brought to trial. It's called a goyel hadam in the biblical term, which basically means the redeemer of the blood, or the blood avenger. So the blood avenger has to be from the father's side, and it has to be close enough relative that he could inherit the property. Otherwise, this rule does not apply to him. Now, when we say that there is no refuge for murderer, because there is a concept called the cities of refuge. In the Torah, the Bible, there's a commandment of designating arei miklat, cities of absorption centers or cities of refuge. And there were such cities in the land of Israel. And basically, if a person accidentally killed someone, he goes to that city and he stays there, and it serves as a dual purpose: protection from the blood avenger. He's not allowed to kill him as long as he stays in the limits of the city. And it's also a means of a punishment for such a terrible thing happening to the person, albeit it was unintentional, and that is exile. The person is exiled, so that's a form of a punishment. So it's protection and a punishment. And it does not apply nowadays. It hasn't applied for the past 2,000 years. And we will have it with Mashiach. Not only will we have it, but in addition to the 6 original cities, we're going to have 3 more, making it a total of 9. And then there's a whole discussion in the Talmud, as we're about to touch upon in number 12, how it applies to non-Jews. If the killing was manslaughter, that is, if the killer acted unintentionally but negligently, and it is a matter of a ger toishav, if you remember that term, that's considered a Noachite who accepted upon himself formally in front of the Jewish court to keep the 7 Noachite commandments, and he lives in the land of Israel. And according to the Rambam, there is no ger toishav, whereas the Rambam says we do not accept a ger toishav as long as we don't have the yovel, the Jubilee year, in effect. And again, according to the Rambam, in order to have the Jubilee year, we have to have all the Jews living in the land of Israel, which basically means that, relatively speaking, in the big historic picture, relatively, it was a short period of time where we actually had the concept of a biblical ger toishav, and for that matter, the Jubilee year. It was only a couple of cycles. It's every 50th year, and it was during the time that the Jews first came to the land of Israel until the tribes, the 10 tribes, were exiled, which was still in the time of the first temple. So that means we didn't really have too many Jubilee years in the sense of on a biblical level, and therefore ger toishav as well. So that's what I'm saying, that it doesn't really apply now. So if a ger toishav killing another ger toishav, the killer flees to a designated city of refuge until his trial comes up. That is the conclusion in the Talmud. If the courts rule that he did kill, but unintentionally, he must return to the city of refuge and reside there until the high priest of the Jews dies. The death of the righteous is an atonement for the generation. Now, this is the rule, the way it applies for Jews. And between ger toishav and ger toishav, it applies the same as it does to Jews. If a ger toishav accidentally, unintentionally, I should say, killed another ger toishav, then he goes to the city of refuge, just like a Jew would, and stays there until the passing of the high priest of the day. Then he is free to return to his home. And the avenger of blood cannot touch him. Story's over. If he leaves the city of refuge prior to the death of the high priest, the blood avenger may find him and kill him. the blood avenger is held harmless for killing the manslaughterer. Okay, and just to try to dramatize it a little bit, the blood avenger is permitted, or the blood avengers are permitted, to stake out the city of refuge and wait for the moment that the manslaughterer of their relative steps out of bounds, and boom, they can kill him. That is acceptable. In other words, the person who did the killing better stay in the city of refuge. All his needs are met there. They have groceries and everything is brought to them, and they have a synagogue, and they have everything is there. There's no need to leave. He's not allowed to leave, and the moment that he leaves, he is forfeiting his own life by having the avenger being able to kill him. So don't try to outsmart him and think, well, I'll just step out for a moment or something, or there's no need. You have all the fresh air you want in the city. It's a city. It's not a cell. It's not a building. He's living in a city of refuge. Okay. If a Ger Toshav kills an Israelite, now it's a different story. So again, the Ger Toshav killed the Jew unintentionally, but negligently, same situation. Or if he kills another Ger Toshav because he thought that it was permissible, he didn't realize that it's forbidden to kill. This is considered tantamount to killing intentionally. He is liable for the death penalty. So in other words, if a Ger Toshav unintentionally killed a Jew, the rule is different. Then he is put to death, and he does not go to the city of refuge. That deal only applies between Jew and Jew, or between Ger Toshav and Ger Toshav. If a Noachite who does not live according to the 7 universal commandments, okay, in other words, a regular non-Jew, kills another Noachite in a circumstance of manslaughter, he is subject to the death penalty, and the city of refuge affords him no protection. In other words, the city of refuge is only for a Ger Toshav. It's not for any non-Jew. Clearly a Ger Toshav. And again, just like we have no Ger Toshav now, we also have no cities of refuge now. So this is all, so to say, theoretical. In any case, where a blood avenger kills the manslaughterer, if a relative of the slain manslaughterer seeks revenge against the blood avenger and kills him, that relative is deemed a murderer and is prosecuted as such. Now, it doesn't just keep rolling on forever. The blood avenger has the right to kill the person who unintentionally killed his relative. That's it. Now, he did so on purpose. No one has a right to kill him. And if one of the relatives does, that person is a murderer. And they cannot claim, well, he killed my relative. And even though he had a right to, but then I have a right to kill him. No, this is not the Wild West. This is not a jungle. 13. There is a difference of opinion as to whether the 7 universal commandments include the commandment forbidding the willful destruction of a man's seed through masturbation or any other act of wasting semen. Now, maybe I should give a little bit of an introduction, or perhaps we should first read this paragraph. Let's read the next 2 paragraphs inside before we discuss it. All agree, however, that sexual relations with a woman who is incapable of bearing children is not considered wasting semen. Okay, so even though for whatever reason she can't have children, let's say she's post, menopause, or whatever the case is, or let's say she's a barren woman by birth, that doesn't make a difference. As long as it goes properly where it's supposed to, it's not prohibited at all. One opinion is that the commandment to be fruitful and multiply, having been given to Noah, but not repeated to Moses, was in force only during those generations before the historical event of Mount Sinai. That's why I went on to read the next verse after it's the prohibition of murder. Then verse 7 was be fruitful and multiply. In those early times, wasting semen was considered among the most heinous of sins and a chief reason that God brought the flood to destroy the world. Now, our tradition is that was one of the main problems that actually caused the flood. Moreover, the Torah clearly teaches that Judah's two sons, Er and Oinan, were killed by God for the thing which he, referring to Oinan, did was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 38:10. I'll soon remind you of what happened there. But this event also occurred before the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So this opinion concludes that since the commandment against wasting seed was not repeated at Mount Sinai, it is no longer in effect as part of the 7 universal commandments. Okay. This is a really, really serious difference whether we're going to go by this opinion or that opinion. Now, the story in Genesis 38 is that one of the 12 sons of Yaakov, of Jacob, one of the tribes, father of the tribes, Judah, son number 4, Judah married and had 3 sons. First one is Er, second one is Oinan. And Er married a very, very righteous, lovely woman by the name of Tamar. And then Er was punished by God and died. And then Yehuda, keeping the Torah, which was not yet given, had his younger son, number 2, Oinan, and his daughter-in-law keep the mitzvah, the commandment of what's called yibum. And that's basically if a person dies childless, so then the widow is to be married by the brother of the deceased to perpetuate the name. So Oinan married his brother's widow. But then, and here the Torah tells us what he did wrong, and it says that he had sinned like his brother as well. So that's how we know that they both did the same thing, and they both were punished and killed for the same sin. And basically, what he did was wasted seed in his relations with her. Now, Yehuda was unaware of this. And at this point, he sent her away, and he said, the third son is Shelah. He's too young to marry you now, because Yehuda felt that something was wrong, even though she was very righteous. And as far as he knew, there's nothing wrong with her, but, so to say, he felt maybe his sons were allergic to her or something like that. Anyhow, so he sent her away, and he said, don't call us, we'll call you. And he had no intention of calling her. And then the story continues, and it's pretty amazing and interesting as to what continued after that, how God turned things around. But anyway, the point being that there we find individuals prior to the giving of the Torah being put to death by the heavenly court for spilling seed. So there's 2 ways to look at that. One opinion is that shows you that even a Noachite is not allowed to, and it's pretty severe. It's like murder. Caused the flood. We know of 2 people, at least by name, we know exactly who they were. They were put to death for this sin. The other opinion says, since it was before the giving of the Torah, and then we don't find that later on, after the giving of the Torah, it's repeated for the Noachites. So therefore, it was considered a forbidden act for any human being, for all of the sons of Noah. And yes, of course, it caused the flood. However, once God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, it's only prohibited for a Jew, and a non-Jew is not prohibited from wasting seed. So that's in the authorities, two different opinions, which is a huge difference. But let's continue. The other opinion states that despite it's not being repeated at Mount Sinai, since it was originally part of the 7 universal commandments, a man must not willfully destroy his seed, though the act is not punishable by the courts. So he won't be put to death by the courts, but he's not allowed to, big time, not allowed to do it. After a man has fulfilled his minimal obligation of bringing a son and a daughter into the world, if he wishes then to use contraceptive devices, he should use those types that do not act directly on the semen. Also, according to this viewpoint, masturbation would be strictly forbidden. With regards to Jews, there's absolutely no question. It is big time forbidden. No question about it. But with regards to Bnei Noach, two opinions. In spiritual terms, the reason for the great concern and strictness concerning the wasting of a man's seed is that it is considered the willful destruction of his life-giving force and equated with life itself. Therefore, very harsh words now coming up. Therefore, the destruction of a man's seed is related closely to murder, and more to the murder of his own children, because potentially this could have been child. You're going to tell me that his wife cannot conceive, or he has no wife. So what do you mean his own children? It doesn't matter. As far as the man is concerned, his seed is a potential child. The fact that there happens to be no woman who can have a relationship with him and therefore conceive and bring children, that doesn't change the fact that what he's doing by wasting seed is killing his own children. Now, again, there are volumes about this sin, and it's in books of what's called Musar, Jewish religious ethics, and in Hasidus, it's discussed very, very much. But right now, we're focusing on the Noachide. So one approach is that, as difficult as it may be for some people, and for some people it's not as difficult, depending on the individual, but most healthy men have this urge, this drive. That's how men were wired. That's how God created us. And what the person needs to do is to channel it in the proper way. And God gave men this strong desire so that we can fulfill the obligation of being fruitful and multiply. But it's not a switch that one can turn on and off. So at times, it could become extremely difficult. And if you're going to take the stricter opinion, well then, what can I tell you? That there's no way that you're allowed to. Just not allowed. Simply a big sin, huge sin. And even though the court would not put a person to death for it, but the heavenly court would. And it's absolutely forbidden. And just remember, God does not demand of us what we cannot do. So if he's telling us that we're not allowed to do it, and it's such a severe sin, and it causes the flood, well, then there you have it. However, Noachites have the not the privilege, but they have the comfort or the option of following the other opinion, which means that it's not forbidden for Noachites. They have that luxury. So bottom line, it would depend on who one asks, because as we said, that there is difference of opinion amongst the codifiers. But yeah, this is one of the big challenges that people have. And even if one is going to take the lenient opinion for the Noachites, but just remember the importance of and the value of life and the potential of life, etc., etc. All right, and now we're going to open up for any questions or comments. And remember, many of these paragraphs, as I said, can speak volumes. I know could be lots of what ifs and lots of questions, some of which I cannot answer for one reason or another, but let's try to see what we can do. Anyone have any question or comment?
I guess this is me and Bob. So
Okay.
That brings me to question the issue of abortion. And in the African American community, in the past 40 years, there's been almost 23 million abortions. And this has been a big issue in our community because people are saying that this organization, Planned Parenthood, was designed by someone to eliminate a group of people. And this lady's name is Margaret Sanger. And so a lot of African Americans are very conservative in their opinions about things. And this is one of them. Some of them are saying, hey, this shouldn't be happening in our community the way it's happening, because, I mean, this is 23 million souls that exponentially could have grown into 100 million souls or 200 million souls. And the fact that they were not allowed to come into the earth is kind of a sin. People are seeing it that way in a certain way. So I'm wondering, when a Noahide who doesn't believe in abortion is not believing it for these reasons, is he right in his belief? Because he stands to believe that Hashem's law is more important than somebody's equal rights to commit abortion.
What's the question? Of course.
That's the question. Yes.
Well, I don't understand what's the doubt here. What's the question?
Well, there's a lot of people who don't believe it, and if is a Noahide responsible to tell people this is just not right?
People that think that abortion doesn't fall under the God-given commandment of murder is what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is our responsibility, of course. It's like, what happens if someone says that they don't believe that you can't murder people under 18? Or someone says they don't believe you can't murder people that are over age 80.
Mm-hmm.
That's ridiculous. Or what happens if they say, oh, you can murder women? They're secondary. They're just ladies. They're not real people. That's absurd.
So, but they're following the law of the land. The law of the land says, okay, go ahead and do it.
No, if the law of the land says that murder is permissible, it doesn't change it. They cannot. One of the Noahide commandments is to establish courts of law, not that they can change or go against any of the other six. There's two opinions. Is it in order to uphold the six, or is it to expand and make laws? But none of the laws that they make are allowed to go against any of the six. They can't say that you're allowed to eat a limb off of a living animal. The law of the land, they say it's permissible. No, they can't. God said it's not. They can't say you could steal. They can't do that. So they can't say you could murder. And since the Torah says that abortion is murder, see, we're pro-choice. And the choice is, do I listen to the word of God, and get rewarded and do what I was put here to do? Or do I listen to my own evil inclination or my own intellect or my own emotions when they go against God's word and get punished for that and go against the purpose of me being created? You have a choice. So we're pro-choice. We're pro-life and we're pro-choice.
Okay.
But that's the choice.
So when a Supreme Court sits there and says, okay, it's okay for you guys to do this, we're supposed to challenge them, correct?
Yes. Exactly how that looks and how we are. But yes, we are to petition. We are to challenge them. We are to try to get them to change that. That is absolutely true. Yes, it is a mitzvah. It would be a wonderful good deed to put money and effort to make the publicity, whether it's billboards, whether it's on all the electronic devices, the media, whatever it takes. However, definitely, any time a country or a state says that anytime that they legalize abortion, that is going against the word of God. That is legalizing a form of murder. Now, again, it doesn't mean that there aren't cases that a woman would be allowed to terminate a pregnancy.
You mean like incest, rape, or something like that?
No, that's not a good example.
That's the one the court uses.
What?
A lot of states. That's the one a lot of states and courts are using.
Yeah, but that's no, it's not allowed. The example what I'm thinking of is if the fetus is endangering, but truly endangering the life of the mother, then it's a serious question. And again, just hypothetically, without going into the details, I'm not saying that any particular case. Each case has to be ruled by an authoritative codifier or an authority, as I said. But the general rule is, if the fetus is endangering the mother's life, then the mother comes first and the pregnancy should be terminated. But that's an extreme case. Even if it's many cases like that, they're all extreme and they're all exceptions. Doesn't matter what the numbers are. Every one of those cases, even if they're many, they are the exception to the rule. And that's very important to remember. And again, there's a difference first 40 days and afterwards. But yeah, definitely. It is a big issue nowadays. And it's been debated, and this is going on in the United States for decades, right? Ever since in the 60s, yeah, whatever that first case, Roe versus Wade, right? Well, what was the date? When was that case?
The Supreme Court just ruled that it was unconstitutional, actually. So now people are upset that they've had that right taken away from them to have abortions.
She's still living, right? That child from that case. I think so. I'm saying she's around. She's been interviewed, and yeah. So yeah, there's no question about it. According to even though a lot of the things that we learned about, there's disputes and there's difference of opinions about many of them, but the general rule, there's no difference of opinion. All opinions in Jewish law agree that abortion for non-Jews is forbidden under the rule of murder. That's the general rule.
Okay. All right. Now,
what's another question becomes, what happens if because of today's technology, the medical field, etc., that if the child will be born, they will be severely handicapped or whatever.
I wouldn't think that would be a reason to abort it, but I mean, people do.
That's correct. We are not Nazis, and we do not agree with killing anybody who is any less than what we want, or whatever the bar is, or whatever the description is. We cannot play God, and you cannot say all retarded people should be killed.
Well,
sick.
I did some study on this. The Nazis came to the United States to learn eugenics. And eugenics is this science that's here that says the feeble-minded and the poor and impoverished are a danger to society's development, so they should be eliminated. And this was what Margaret Sanger, who created Planned Parenthood, stood on in her idea of what she wanted to see with the abortions that were taking place in the clinics that came from her organization, was that the poor were going to harm the lifestyles of the normal people in the future, so they should be eliminated. And there are people who actually practice this in the United States even today.
Very tragic and very sad.
Yeah. Next thing, I'll wait till you finish on this. I don't want to move on till you're ready.
Go on. Next.
All right. So I'll take for an example, my brother, he had a stroke, and he became brain dead. And the family members were divided. Some said, well, we don't do this eugenics thing. We don't do this thing where not eugenics. What do you call it?
Euthanasia.
Euthanasia. And other family members said, well, we feel bad. And this kind of goes into what you were saying a minute ago. But brain dead, according to what you were saying, is not a reason either, apparently. Even though clinically the doctors have said, oh, he's dead. The person isn't here anymore.
It's controversial.
It is.
Again, and many families have that situation when a relative is at the end of the life or in that situation. And the authorities, the Jewish, religious, top authorities, don't exactly agree. And again, it's very detailed. So I don't want to say anything which can be misconstrued or misunderstood, because there's lots of details. We're talking about literally life and death, but like sometimes it's a matter of prolonging. Sometimes it's a matter of, pulling the plug. That's one extreme. But then there's the idea of not continuing, and lots of things like that.
So you're saying even in the Jewish circles that there's no determination in this case when death is actually taking place?
Well, it depends who you ask. Some of the authorities, the authorities are very clear about it. The problem is that it's different opinions. But if you ask Rabbi A, who is an authority, and he is, top notch, this is what his verdict is. But you ask Rabbi B, who's equally as great as Rabbi A, and he says it differently. So it's an issue. And we're talking about life and death. We're not talking about something any less than that. So it's very, very serious.
Okay. So how does a Noahide supposed to respond to this when it happens, when he's in the midst of this? I mean, does he shun his family? Does he tell them, no, we're not going to do this? And then everybody teams up against him and says, yes, we are, and you're not going to do anything.
He needs to get guidance from an authoritative rabbi in this area who is ordained and has a right to rule in this area. And he has to contact that rabbi, tell him, I am a non-Jew, I am a Noachide, and this is the relative, and this is the situation. And what are we to do? And then if, in that case, he says, you are to prolong the person's life, and then he says, well, my relatives, I'm outnumbered. Doesn't matter. You do whatever you can do. And it's not like, well, we have to take into consideration what the other relatives say. No. Question is, what is the right thing to do? And it could be that the relatives are right in this case. So bottom line is, a person would have to ask the authoritative rabbi to give a legal ruling and to follow what he says. But it's very important. It's not anybody who's called a rabbi, and it's not even someone who's very knowledgeable, and it's not even someone who can give a legal ruling in other areas. It has to be someone who this is his expertise, and he can give a legal ruling in this area.
These people actually exist today?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, I'll just throw out here in America a name of an organization, which, I mean, I doubt that they get questions from Noachites. They're dealing day and night with Jews, but, person should contact them and say, I'm a Noachite, so maybe there is a difference. Maybe you have to be more lenient with me or more strict, but you have to tell them that you're a Noachite. And the name of the organization is Oirech Yomim, which means long life. Let me make sure I get it right. Hold on. Something like that. Let me check here. Chaim Arukim, it's called. That's right. 1 second.
I am.
One moment. And find the exact name. Something which means long life, or longevity. Chaim.
I'll tell you what. I'll take the information. If you have Bob send it to me later. I don't want to interfere with the class. The thing is this would be something that, say, as a Noahide who talks to other Noahides, if one asks, or we could say, this is something you can do if you come into this situation, we would have some be able to point this person in that direction.
And there, a lot of the rabbis, there is a networking amongst the rabbis, so that they'll, if you get in there with the question with the person that says you're a rabbi, he would be able to ask kind of up the chain,
right,
and get the answer that way. That's how it often works. So your rabbi in Des Plaines would be the person probably to talk to, and then he would know who to talk to.
But I mean, just in general, if I am a Noahide and I'm out here and I'm talking to other Noahides and say I'm reading to them from this book, and I'm doing the same thing that's going on here, I have to be able to give them a source and all the rest of that stuff. So I think that's important. One
possibility would be to ask Noah, and I know it's not always I'm not exactly sure if there's a cell phone. I think I have the cell phone number at least back when he lived in the United States, but there are people, some of the rabbis in the Noahide movement with Ask Noah, or maybe Rabbi Peretz or someone like that, who would be able to get you into the network. I know in a situation like that, you need an answer. You need to contact them quickly, so you don't want to be going through a long process. But there are.
Well, again, it's for not necessarily for myself, But for other
Right.
Noahites who are experiencing it, I would want to point them in that direction. I wouldn't want them to have to wait, like you said, and wait for. I mean, I can probably contact Ask Noah. I have a good relationship with communication with the rabbis there. As far as whenever I write something, they respond all the time. So that makes sense.
Right, they would know who to contact to get more of an opinion.
Rabbi Shulman, I believe.
Yes,
One of the things that he does is when these kind of questions come up, they literally post a communication or the conversation about it, and the rabbi usually gives his opinion on what needs to be done later on. So this would probably be a good thing to bring up in that group. And
I had a question a couple years ago that I needed. It was a complicated question I needed an answer for. And I talked to my rabbi. My rabbi talked to, I think his name is Yosef Shulman. That's Dr. Shulman's son. And Yosef Shulman sent the question to Rabbi Weiner, and then it came back through the through the network that way. And I got the question. I got the answer. So the network does work.
Mhm. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So the next thing I was curious about, you made a statement that because of the spilling of seed is why the flood was created. This is the first I've ever heard that.
Yeah.
What I mean, what is that all about? Where are the resources to study what was happening before the flood? All I know is that the world was violent, and that doesn't really tell me what was going on.
Right.
This right here,
So
Huh?
in the written law, in the Bible, in the Chumash, it just says very briefly that the world was filled with chamas, ches mem samech, which means corruption. I guess that would be one way to translate it. Question is what? So there's different midrashim, different interpretations or explanations, I should say, in the oral tradition. Some say that it was theft, but primarily it was sexual relations that were inappropriate, whether it was same gender or bistanomy, and then of course what we're talking about over here was the spilling of the seed. Yeah, and that's why it actually says that one who spills seed, it's as if they're bringing a flood to the world, or it's worthy, God forbid, of bringing a flood to the world.
There's two stories in the Bible I remember reading in the Torah, not Torah, but the prophets.
Yeah.
Yeah, one was about Sodom and Gomorrah. The other one was about the tribe of Benjamin and an act that they did when a man came to town and they literally surrounded the house and asked that the man be brought outside. And instead he threw his wife outside and they assaulted her all night long and she was found dead. And he chopped her body up into a number of parts and sent it out through the land of Israel. And all the tribes came and descended upon this town in Benjamin and killed all the males. In Sodom and Gomorrah, we're told that the main reason that it was destroyed was, in that Christian circles and stuff like that, was because of homosexuality. But some people are saying it was more about violence in different other ways than just that. And I'm wondering, is this a revisitation of what actually happened to destroy the world in the first place with the flood? So that these cities were kind of like reminders, or these incidents were reminders of that, or not?
Not necessarily like that. It's, Stayman and Moira, they had a whole list of things that they were doing, which was deserving of destruction. But the flood, the primary things were theft, and inappropriate behavior in this regard.
You say theft, but wasn't murder a part of that? But then murder is theft.
Nah, before the flood, was it really murder? Okay, maybe. Word is malahat, it's Hamas. Seconds. Yes, the way they translate it in this particular Chumash, Hamas, violent crime. And Rashi brings down that their fate was not sealed, meaning there were other things, but the fate was not sealed only because of robbery. That's what actually sealed the deal, so to say, for Hashem to bring the flood, was robbery.
Robbery?
Robbery. That's from the Talmud.
So let's I'm just taking current day events and looking at that. In Chicago, one of the biggest things that's going on right now is this crime of robbery, and people doing it all over the place. Is this the kind of stuff they're talking about?
But we have a guarantee that God will never bring a flood to the world again. That's
Right,
what the
but
rainbow is about.
But I mean, as far as the severity of the issues that created that flood, I mean, it's the same stuff, right?
I guess that's our job, to educate people
Mhm.
and to be living examples of what it's supposed to be.
All right, I guess you answered all my questions.
All right. So till next time, we are planning on meeting again next week. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. All the best.
Sexual relations next time, huh?
That is correct. That's the next chapter.
Okay, got it. Glad I got my book.
Okay, Aaron.
All right, Bob.
You have a good evening.
It's been a great one, and I appreciate you guys.